Yesterday, former Free State Premier Ace Magashule pleaded not guilty to all charges levelled against him in the 255 million rand asbestos roof removal case being held in the Bloemfontein High Court, and this after years of delays. Magashule, who is the 13th accused, maintains that the charges against him are trumped up and politically motivated. Now, the trial has been postponed until next week, the 23rd of April. But to help us unpack some of the legal technicalities that have come up so far, we're joined virtually now by Mpumelelo Zikalala, who's a legal expert at Zikalala Attorneys. Thanks so much for your time, Mpumelelo, and welcome to Morning Live.
Good morning to you, and also good morning to our viewers.
So, Mpumelelo, if we can just start, firstly, the delays. And this is always an issue, especially in the current context where we hear of so many delays. And the question is always how that impacts not only on justice, but also just on the cases that are to be presented after people have had to wait for so long.
In fact, there are maybe two or three elements that one would look at. Firstly, is the most important one, the quality and the quantity of the evidence. Remember, when you go to court, as a state, you have to prove beyond reasonable doubt that the person is guilty. Now, if you're not going to have the quality and the quantity of the evidence that will enable you to do that, at the end of the day, you're not going to win the case. But that could also apply to the defendant or to the accused, in which, in this case, they also have to prove their defense and state what their defense is. So if you're going to find those live witnesses that will go into the stand and be able to say, this is what happened on the day, then the chances of you being your case diminishes as you move along. It's the element of justice in terms of saying how justice is supposed to move if we are ever engaging in this process. We're ever going to deal with the Criminal Procedure Act in the manner in which it is in, which is then innovative way of doing things from the side of the NPA to say, instead of having 5 or 6 or even 19, a difficult case to manage, because as soon as one person is not available, then the whole case collapses. Maybe try and separate those cases into smaller groups, stick with the low-hanging fruits, get those convictions, and once you've got those, then you can big to the so-called bigger or persons of interest that you can sort of bring in. So it calls upon of being part of the NPA to say, how are we going to be seen to be effective to do our prosecutions, doing it in line with the scripts actually say in terms of the Constitution and the Criminal Procedure Act.
So, Mpumelelo, to that point, you look at, as you say, how all of these charges were brought against the various accused here. Now, looking at the charges against Ace Magashule's former PA, were you surprised with the state's decision to withdraw some of the charges against Cholota yesterday?
No. That's when you're able to see an case here. I may have allegations, but at the end of the day, being able to prove this very high mass to be able to pass the doubt that the person is guilty, then I'm going. This is the intention which is involved in all of this thing.
All right.
Now look at
my apologies for interjecting. We're just struggling with the bandwidth and the connection to you there. So what we're going to do, we're going to take a quick break and try to sort that out, and then we'll come back because we really want to hear what you have to say about these technicalities. So we are going to take a quick break here on Morning Live. When we come back, we'll try again for some analysis with Mpumelelo Zikalala, legal expert and attorney, and we're unpacking the 255 million rand Asbestos roof removal trial involving former Free State Premier Ace Magashule and his co-accused, and just getting some analysis on some of the technicalities. Welcome back, and just getting back to that conversation of what's happening in the Free State High Court. Yesterday, former Free State Premier Ace Magashule pleaded not guilty to all charges levelled against him, and this in the 255 million rand asbestos roof removal case that is currently sitting in the High Court in Bloemfontein. And it has, of course, taken many years of delays, but Magashule and his co-accused finally have pleaded, and all of them have pleaded not guilty. So we are joined, and hopefully this time a better connection by Mpumelelo Zikalala, a legal expert, and he's of course with Zikalala Attorneys. Mpumelelo, our apologies there for the poor connection. But we were talking about the delays first, but then also about, my question to you was whether you were surprised about some of the charges being withdrawn against a Cholota, who was the former personal assistant to the former Premier Ace Magashule, and you were still explaining that to us.
Well, I wasn't really surprised. It's bound to happen in cases similar to this one, because at the end of the day, while the person is doing the investigations and they are laying those initial charges, you throw in everything in the book. And then as time goes on, you're able to evaluate your evidence, able to assess your witnesses, you then come back and say, I'll not be able to pass the high master of proving in this particular case or this particular offense beyond reasonable doubt. So the next best thing to do is to remove those things, remove those cases or those offenses that I'll not be able to prove, and simply leave with the ones that would be able to assist my case. And the second point in this one, remember, what they're trying to tie her in is in the overall scheme of things as to what was her role, who gave you that particular instruction, and by doing so, maybe there are other co-accused that will be able to link to this case. Now, if the elements or the crimes that you are stating against or the offenses you are stating against it are not going to assist you in doing that, no, so it's much better to remove them rather to run a case at the end of the day, knowing very well that you're not going to be successful.
And one of the other issues raised by Cholota's legal team is her extradition from the United States, where they say that there was something untoward in that entire process. And this is one that took 2 years, if we may remind our viewers.
Well, there's a different battle altogether, and that can be fought in a different forum. What you can do and raise it within this one is to say, let's look at the manner of the investigation, the manner in which things have been done, and maybe throw in maybe insinuations to say there may have been other influences during the IO in terms of that have led her to be one of the accused. There's nothing which is really linking her to the whole case. Hence, you can't really say that she's guilty. But to try and fight that extradition and make it a point in which will then lead to a not guilty plea, I do not think that would be successful. It's a totally different battle.
And then Magashule, he's always maintained that the charges against him have been politically motivated. In terms of, what we've seen so far, what we've been told, do you think that the state has a strong case against him, given the position that he held at the time when this particular tender was awarded?
That is going to be very difficult, because you then need the people that were signing and issue out the tenders. In this case, the HOD, the person who was in charge of the SAM, to then come back and say, I issued those tenders to this particular company A or Z because I was given instructions by the MEC or the Premier at that time. So if he's going to come and say, which I think is going to be his evidence, I do not sit in SAM processes and SAM meetings. I don't even draft those SAM or tender documents. I do not even oversee the process that is there. I simply get involved or got involved during the departments or as the Premier on a strategic level, and my involvement ended there. So how could have I influenced this particular process? Then at the end of the day, he's going to be exonerated, unless there were certain allegations of misconduct that have took place, allegations of criminality that have taken place, and he was forced to act in terms of the Public Finance Management Act. Then you can come back and say, there's something wrong in which you have done, Mr. Magashule, we are going to hold you accountable. But in terms of the active involvement, it's going to be a very difficult task for the NPA to be able to prove.
And then, of course, we heard from the legal counsel for Magashule and Edwin Sodi, who said that evidence from the State Capture Commission of Inquiry cannot be used against the accused. So can you just explain this for us? Because the counsel did mention, some relevant clauses that he was basing this assertion on. So please explain that to us.
Maybe if you remember, when the State Capture Commission started, there was a provision that said if you are going to come and give evidence, you are going to receive some immunity, similar to what the TRC would have done previously. However, that was changed during the course of the commission to then say, if there's a need to prosecute you, that's exactly what you are going to do. But in this case, you have to come back and say, who did that immunity apply to? Did it apply to anyone who was implicated as per the evidence that you're going to give, or it only applied to you as the person who was giving the evidence? In this case, I would argue that it applied to you, the person who was sitting there in front of the former Chief Justice, to say, this is the information that I'm giving. Everybody else who's being complained about is game in terms of being prosecuted and can be prosecuted in any manner. The level or the emergence of any evidence that is there, it's still going to be tested during cross-examination in this case. So there's no prejudice which is going to be suffered by the parties. So they can try and argue that that evidence cannot be utilized, but arguing that you need to do that within these proceedings. And the most important part that you need to say is to say, why shouldn't that evidence be held against or be heard in this particular forum when, according to me, it's fresh evidence, it ought to be listened to, it pertains to the case and the elements of this case, and you are then given an opportunity to cross-examine the person who's going to be dealing with it, to make sure that it is authentic, to make sure that it is able to link all the elements that are linked to this charge. So it is an argument that is there, but I do not think that argument is going to pass in court.
And, speaking of those delays, there was also, of course, the murder of implicated businessman Igor Mpambani. And what sort of influence is that likely to have on this trial, if at all, Mpumelelo?
Then it moves on to my earlier submission of saying the quality and the quantity of the evidence is then affected. And that works both ways, both for the state and both for the defense, because if you don't have someone who's going to go into that box and speak positively about you, be able to make sure that there are certain facts which are stated and are known to the court, then it makes the task of being able to prove that you are innocent a bit of a difficult one. Yes, we all know, legally speaking, that that's not your job to do, but in order to discredit what the NPA is stating against you, you need witnesses, you need evidence. If you don't have that evidence, it's going to be a difficult task. Including in that evidence, it is not only viva voce evidence, but also documentary evidence in which you are going to have disclosed or you have disclosed by now to say these are the exhibits which are going to be utilized. Now, if people are going to pass away before this trial actually ends or before it is actually started, then it is detrimental to both parties and it may lead to other extended delays, which then links to what the Constitution is saying. The Constitution assures us the right of saying that your trial must start and end within the shortest reasonable amount of time. And if that cannot be obtained, you can actually raise an objection and say, I should not be held accountable because of these delays that have taken place.
And to your earlier point about perhaps, dealing with this in smaller chunks, already we're seeing there was someone who was unable to appear in court stating illness. You have Ace Magashule, who perhaps said he may need a state legal funding, things like that. And given the number of accused in this case, this could take a long, long time.
Definitely. All you have to do is to look maybe to the other cases which is happening in Pretoria, the Senzo Meyiwa case, and look how long has that taken with just only 5 accused. Now, if you're going to have double the number of those accused being there, that means the amount of delays are going to be there, either from the accused themselves being sick, not being able to attend, or for whatever reason that may be able to raise, the legal practitioners themselves not being able to attend, either due to other commitments of being sick, or maybe the availability in terms of their diary. And the last one, the availability of the court. If anything happens within the court's equipment, you can't record. That's it for the end of the day. And the financial implications are dire because all those legal practitioners that you see, they are paid by the hour and are paid. And any delays that have taken place, it is up to the individuals to make sure that they continue paying them. So these delays are going to continue, which ought to have been taken care of within the pre-trial conference, and also when the NPA was looking at its legal strategy to say, how do we make sure that there are no delays which are going to take place? Meanwhile, making sure that we can come back and say to the public, due to us being able to prosecute successfully within the asbestos case, we have accused 1, 3, and 5 that have already been sentenced. We are now moving to other accused. We are going to take it in a piecemeal approach to make sure that we are a results-driven NPA.
Well, thank you so much, Mpumelelo Zikalala, helping us understand some of these legal technicalities. He is, of course, a legal expert and with Zikalala Attorneys. And our focus this morning was the 255 million rand asbestos roof removal trial involving the former Free State Premier Ace Magashule and his co-accused.